Welcome back to Crime Podcastle, everyone. We are back with episode 29 in our Unsolved Mystery series.
Oh, wow, 29 already.
Yeah, time flies when you're having fun, right?
Absolutely. Especially when you're uncovering such fascinating and sometimes unsettling stories.
That's for sure. And today's deep dive is no exception, folks. We're taking you to Mumbai, India, for a case that's both inspiring and deeply troubling. The story of Bhupendra Vira, an activist who was murdered in 2016.
This is a case that really highlights the dangers that activists and whistleblowers face, especially when they challenge powerful individuals and systems.
Exactly. What makes this case so compelling is that Vira was using a tool that was actually designed to empower citizens the Right to Information Act, or RTI.
The RTI, it's basically a legal mechanism that allows anyone in India to request information from the government.
All about transparency, right?
Yeah.
Shining a light on how things work, holding those in power accountable.
Precisely. And Vera, he used the RTI brilliantly, He was relentless in his pursuit of exposing wrongdoing, especially when it came to illegal construction projects.
So he was digging up dirt on some pretty powerful people who probably weren't too happy about being exposed.
You can say that again. And as we'll see, his pursuit of justice ultimately put his life at risk.
All right, so in this deep dive, we're going to try to piece together the puzzle of Bhupendra Vira's life and death. Who was he? What made him dedicate himself to fighting corruption? And what led to his tragic murder?
We'll delve into the role of the RTI in this case, examine the challenges of investigating crimes where powerful individuals are implicated,
And explore the broader implications for activists and whistleblowers, not only in India, but around the world.
It's a story that raises some really tough questions about power, corruption, and the price of speaking truth to power.
So let's get started, shall we? Let's start by getting to know Bhupendra Vira. He was 61 years old at the time of his death, a resident of Mumbai's Kalina neighborhood.
Kalina, like many parts of Mumbai, was grappling with rampant corruption.
And from what I've read, Vira was known as a man of integrity, someone who wouldn't stand for injustice. He was driven to action,
He was. He witnessed firsthand how illegal construction was encroaching on public land, how powerful individuals were grabbing resources, how ordinary people were being exploited.
And he wasn't the kind of person to just sit back and watch it happen. He decided to fight back. And that's where the RTI comes in.
The RTI, it was a game changer for activists like Vera. It gave them a legal tool to pry open the doors of secrecy, to demand accountability from those in power.
And Vira, he used it masterfully, exposing illegal land deals, construction violations, all sorts of shady practices.
He really was a thorn in the side of some very powerful people.
People who probably weren't too happy about being exposed.
No, not at all. I mean, can you imagine the kind of pressure he was facing? Threats, intimidation, maybe even attempts to bribe him into silence?
But Vira was undeterred, wasn't he?
He was a man on a mission, determined to shine a light on the corruption that was plaguing his community.
It takes a lot of courage to stand up to those in power, especially when they have a lot to lose.
And that's what makes Vera's story so remarkable, so important. He knew the risks, but he kept pushing, filing RTI applications, exposing wrongdoing, demanding justice.
But sadly, his activism came at a terrible price. On the night of October 15th, 2016, Vira was found dead in his home. He'd been shot in the head.
The timing of his murder, it was incredibly suspicious. Just days before, he had filed a series of complaints and RTI applications directly targeting individuals involved in illegal construction projects.
So it seems pretty clear that he was silenced for his work. Someone wanted to make sure he wouldn't expose any more of their dirty secrets.
That's the most likely scenario. I mean, the police, they immediately launched an investigation, and suspicion quickly fell on those who had the most to lose from Vira's activism.
Like who?
Well, particularly a former local politician named Ramesh Shetty.
A politician? Isn't that ironic? The very people who are supposed to represent the public are sometimes the ones involved in these corrupt schemes.
Sadly, it's a reality in many parts of the world. And in this case, Vira had been openly challenging Shetty's involvement in various illegal activities. He had filed numerous complaints against him, accusing him of corruption and abuse of power.
So Shetty definitely had a motive. But did the police have enough evidence to link him directly to the murder?
Well, that's where things get complicated. Despite the clear motive and the suspicious timing, the investigation quickly hit a wall.
Why? What happened?
The lack of witnesses, the calculated nature of the crime, it all made it incredibly difficult to build a solid case.
So you have a dedicated activist, murdered powerful individuals with potential motives, And yet the investigation stalls due to a lack of
And it
evidence.
really is a classic case of justice delayed, maybe even justice denied.
It's beyond frustrating. This story, it raises so many questions about how we protect those who dare to challenge the status quo, how we ensure accountability when the powerful are involved, and how we achieve justice when the system seems rigged against it.
Absolutely, and that's why Vera's story is so important to tell. It's a story that stays with you long after you hear it. It's a story about courage, corruption, and the fight for justice that often feels like an uphill battle.
It does, and unfortunately, Vera's case is not an isolated incident.
Sadly not. There's a long and troubling history of activists and whistleblowers facing threats, intimidation, and even violence in India and around the world.
It makes you wonder what drives people to become activists in the first place, knowing the risks involved.
Well, I think it's a deep-seated belief in justice, a sense of responsibility to speak out against wrongdoing, even when it's dangerous. They are like modern-day Davids going up against Goliaths, armed with nothing but their courage and a determination to make a difference.
And tools like the RTI, which can be incredibly powerful in the right hands.
Absolutely.
So we've talked about how the RTI can be used to expose corruption. But can you give us some examples of how it's been successful in bringing about real change?
Oh, absolutely. There have been numerous cases where the RTI has been used to uncover scams, hold officials accountable, and force the government to act. For instance, there was a case where an RTI activist used the act to expose a massive food grain scam, leading to the arrest of several corrupt officials and the recovery of millions of dollars.
That's incredible. So the RTI isn't just about accessing information. It's about using that information to trigger real-world consequences.
Exactly. It's about empowering citizens to hold those in power accountable and to demand transparency and good governance.
But as we've seen in Vera's case, there are also significant challenges.
Yes, definitely.
Even with the RTI, achieving justice can be an uphill battle, especially when you're up against powerful interests who are determined to protect their own.
That's right. And there are numerous ways in which activists are silenced or their efforts are thwarted. Sometimes it's through threats and intimidation, sometimes it's through legal harassment, and sometimes it's through bureaucratic stonewalling.
It sounds like a system designed to discourage dissent and protect those in power.
It can certainly feel that way at times, and that's why it's so important to support organizations and individuals who are working to protect activists, promote transparency, and strengthen the rule of law.
So what happened with the investigation into Vera's murder after it stalled? Did anyone continue to push for justice?
Yes, thankfully, Vira's case didn't just fade away. His murder sparked outrage and protests, not just in Mumbai, but across India.
Wow, so it really resonated with people.
It did. Human rights groups, RTI activists, and ordinary citizens, they all demanded a thorough investigation and justice for Vira's family.
They knew that if his murder went unpunished, it would send a chilling message to other activists.
Right.
Like make them think twice about speaking out.
Exactly. And, the media played a crucial role in keeping the pressure on.
Oh, for sure. The media loves a good David and Goliath story.
Vira's story became a national headline, shining a light on the dangers faced by those who challenge corruption.
It's really amazing how one person's story can sometimes spark a wider movement.
Yeah, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths and demand change.
And that's the power of activism, right? Exposing injustice, mobilizing public opinion, putting pressure on those in power to act.
Exactly.
So while the investigation into Vera's murder may have stalled, his legacy continues to inspire others to fight for a more just and transparent society.
It does. And, his story serves as a reminder that the fight for justice is never truly over. It requires constant vigilance, courage, and a willingness to speak truth to power, even in the face of danger.
And his family, they must have been devastated by his loss. How have they coped with this tragedy?
Well, it's hard to imagine the pain they've endured, but they've shown incredible strength and resilience. Turning their grief into action, they've become vocal advocates for justice.
Wow, that's powerful.
Keeping Vira's memory alive and working to ensure that his sacrifice was not in vain.
It's inspiring to see how they've channeled their grief into a force for positive change.
They understand that their fight for justice isn't just about Bhupendra. It's about protecting all those who dare to challenge corruption and demand a better future for India and beyond.
And that brings us to a really important point. Bhupendra Vira's story is not unique.
Unfortunately not.
As we wrap up our deep dive into his life and tragic death, I can't help but think about the courage it took for him to stand up to those in power.
It's a stark reminder that for some people, the pursuit of justice isn't just a slogan.
Right. It's much more than that.
It's a way of life. Even when it puts them in danger?
Yeah. And Vira's story, it raises so many questions about the systems that are supposed to protect us.
The ways in which power can be
The
abused
challenges of achieving real accountability.
really makes you think, you know?
It does. What would you do if you were in Vira's shoes? Would you have the courage to speak out knowing the risks involved?
That's a tough question.
It's a tough question.
But I think Vira's story can inspire us all to be more engaged citizens, to be more aware of the injustices happening around us, and to be more willing to speak up for what we believe in.
I agree with that.
Even small acts of courage, they can make a difference.
Yeah, for sure.
Whether it's speaking out against corruption, supporting organizations that are fighting for justice, or simply educating ourselves about the issues, we can all play a part in creating a more just and equitable society.
Absolutely. His story also highlights the importance of tools like the RTI, which gives citizens the power to demand transparency and hold those in power accountable.
The RTI, it really is a testament to the idea that information is power. And when citizens have access to information, they can use it to challenge corruption, expose wrongdoing, and demand better governance.
But as we've seen, the RTI alone isn't enough.
Right.
We need strong institutions, an independent judiciary, and a culture of accountability to ensure that justice is served.
And perhaps most importantly, we need to protect those who are on the front lines of the fight for justice.
The activists.
The whistleblowers, the journalists who risk their safety to expose the truth, they are the unsung heroes of our democracy.
And they deserve our unwavering support.
They do so. Vira's legacy lives on not only in the ongoing fight for justice in his case, but also in the countless individuals he inspired to stand up for what they believe in.
He showed us that one person can make a difference, that courage can be contagious, and that the pursuit of justice is a fight worth fighting.
And while his murder remains unsolved, his story continues to resonate, reminding us of the power of truth, the importance of accountability, and the enduring human spirit that refuses to be silenced.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life and unsolved murder of Bhupendra Vira. It's a story that challenges us to think critically about the world around us and to ask ourselves what we can do to create a more just and equitable society.
And to remember that the fight for justice is a marathon, not a sprint. It requires constant vigilance, unwavering commitment, and the courage to speak truth to power.
If you found this episode thought-provoking, please share it with others. Bhupendra Vira's story deserves to be heard and his legacy honored.
And remember, the pursuit of justice continues. Let's all do our part to make a difference.
Thanks for listening. And be sure to follow and subscribe to CrimePod Castle for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries.